So yeah, about 60 years ago, the Militant, that was the name of the newspaper of a small group of Marxists initially in Britain. It was launched in 1965. But this group went from just a few dozen people, I think it was at most 50 people in 1965, to having over 8,000 members in the 1980s, to being one of the most successful, actually I think probably the most successful Trotskyist organization in modern British history, at least since the 1930s, and one of the most successful Trotskyist organizations, arguably in the history of the world. By the 1980s, Militant was a household name. There were BBC coverage on this. You can look at it on YouTube. If people were paying attention to the phenomenon when Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party in Britain, you might be aware, Militant was brought up as a boogeyman, as if there was some sort of Trotskyist infiltrators in the Labour Party. BBC journalist, investigative journalist Michael Crick actually wrote a book about the Militant, in which he called it Britain's fifth political party. They had, at their height, 200 full-time organizers, which was actually more than the Labour Party itself. They had 3 members of parliament. They had 50 city councilors across the country. They had a member of the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party and a member of the National Executive Committee of the Trade Union Council, the main trade union council. They also controlled the Liverpool City Council, and they organized and led what was known as the anti-poll tax campaign, in which 14 million people refused to pay. It was a reactionary regressive tax imposed by Margaret Thatcher, and Thatcher resigned because of it. So if, in a sense, Militant brought down Margaret Thatcher. You may not have heard of that. This was the largest act of civil disobedience in British history. Organized huge demonstrations, 250,000 people in London. This is all amazing stuff, right? And there is a lot we can learn from this because we aspire to similar things. But not only to successes. We should not get dizzy with success. We should seek to learn from it. And Militant does not exist anymore. Something went wrong, actually. This is called the rise and fall. So I will talk about the rise of Militant, the reasons for its rise, the things we can learn from that, but also, I think more importantly, what we can learn from its demise, ultimately. At the beginnings, as I said, it was formed in 1964. They had no paper, no full-time organizers. Ted Grant, who had been a Marxist for a number of decades. He had been the main theoretician of the Revolutionary Communist Party in Britain and had kept the ideas alive during a very difficult period in the post-war boom in the 50s and 60s. Had about 50 members, and they launched the Militant, the paper. The most important thing I think we can take away is the method. Marxism, as has been stated in the last presentation, many people brought it up in interventions, Marxism is not a dogma. It is not a series of abstract formula that you foist onto society. It is a method of analysis that allows you to come to certain conclusions on the basis of a study of the concrete situation. And that is what I believe Ted was one of the greatest Marxists that ever lived. And his analysis of Britain at the time, even though they were very small and they had no resources, was to try to find a way to plot a way forward for them to become a force. And that was based on a certain strategy. And I think we can learn a lot from this. So even though they were small, they orientated towards the mass organizations of the working class because they knew, at the end of the day, what's the force that's going to carry out the revolution? The working class. And the working class has its own organizations that exist regardless of us. We have to accept it. They're not perfect. They don't have the perfect leadership or the perfect ideas, but they exist nonetheless. So this was a fundamental strategical orientation towards the mass organizations of the working class. And many Marxist groups had turned their backs on the mass organizations, on principally the Labour Party that had been in government in the 60s and had betrayed, and they had left the Labour Party. Some had even left the trade unions and tried to make new red trade unions, right? But Ted and the comrades that were organized with him did not make this mistake. They accepted the organizations of the working class, warts and all. As Cromwell said, paint me warts and all. They accepted it like that, and they've tried to figure out a strategy in which they could, as Ted said, he said, the main problem, this is a text he wrote in 1959, is how to overcome the weakness and isolation of the revolutionary movement whilst maintaining its principles intact. He said that was the main task, and that actually is the main task for us today. It's not to incubate the perfect ideas aside from everything else, but it's finding a way to connect them to the mass while not making any principled concessions. So this is related to a concept I wanted to talk a bit about first, the concept of sectarianism. Probably everyone here has heard that word before. It's thrown around on the left a lot today. But what does that mean? Sectarianism is not simply that you're critical to others on the left, or maybe you don't want to work with some group for some reason or another. That's not really what we mean by sectarianism. What we mean by that is a small group of people, like ourselves actually, that turn their backs on the real movement of the working class, on the real development of it, that don't want to connect with it. And at a certain stage of development, this is inevitable. A bit of sectarianism is inevitable. As Trotsky describes, he says, every working class party, every faction passes during the initial stages through a period of pure propaganda, i.e., the training of its cadres. The period of existence as a Marxist circle engrafts invariably habits of an abstract approach to the problems of the workers' movement. He who is unable to step in time over the confines of this circumscribed existence becomes transformed into a conservative sectarian. And we have seen time and time again, many Marxists. This is one of the main problems with revolutionary Marxist groups in a country like Canada, in the US, and Britain, is that they kind of like get upset at the level of consciousness of the working class, that the organizations aren't perfect enough for them, and they turn their backs on it. And then it means you're basically meaningless. So this is a challenge for us today. It is not insult to say this, but we have sectarianism in our ranks, inevitably. Maybe some of us here, a little bit sectarian at times. Because we are a small revolutionary group against the current of society, against all odds, actually, against the labor bureaucracy, against the student union leadership, against the leadership of the Palestine movement sometimes, against whatever. We're putting forward a different idea, a revolutionary solution, right? And so that kind of can lead to a certain sectarian attitude. And we have to find a way to overcome that. And find a way to engage with regular working class people, starting from where they're at to lead them to the conclusion, the revolutionary socialist conclusion. Understand the real issues workers face. Do not approach them with abstract formula, but learn how to start from their day-to-day struggles, right? And lead them to the conclusion. At the time in Britain, back to Britain, the main organizations of the working class were the unions, the trade unions. They had millions and millions of people in the trade unions. And the Labour Party. The Labour Party was connected to the trade unions. It was the political wing of the trade union movement. It was built by the trade unions. All of the main ideas and perspectives of the Militant came from Ted Grant. The previous strategy they had been doing open work, kind of like what we're doing now. But before that, in the 30s, they had been doing what they called entrism, which meant entry into another organization. In Britain, this was in the Labour Party, and it had been in what was known as the ILP, which was the Independent Labour Party. But this strategy was a short-term interest strategy. It was you would go in, there would be, in the 30s, it was a revolutionary epoch. There was mass revolutionary ferment. The ILP was an organization of over 100,000 revolutionaries that split from the Labour Party and was talking about revolution and anti-capitalism and class struggle. And the Trotskyists in Britain entered into it to engage in dialogue with these people. They joined it, right? Similarly, there was discontent in the Labour Party, especially when they joined a coalition government with the Conservatives during World War II, and actually were strike breakers. They were against striking. They were, so there was a massive discontent. This was the previous entry strategy. It was a short-term thing. To go in when there's ferment in the ranks and connect with these people that are upset, and looking for a solution. Because the fact of the matter is when the masses enter struggle, they don't go to tiny groups. Most of them, they don't. They don't understand. It's not like a corner store and you go in and you're picking out a chocolate bar. Got the Revolutionary Communist Party, got Socialist Action, got the International Socialists, here's the anarchists, and here's the NDP and the trade unions. They don't even see most of that, right? They don't even notice it because for them functionally, we don't exist. So you have to take that into consideration. And this was the fundamental to the strategy of the militant at the time. And the perspective this was in the middle of the 60s. It was at the height of what was known as the post-war boom. The perspective was that this boom was running out of steam and would eventually lead to a massive crisis, which it eventually did in the early 70s. There was a huge crisis. You had what was known as stagflation, which we've come to know here. But it was much worse in the 70s. All throughout the 70s, you had inflation in the double digits with no economic growth. People were losing their jobs. And this is the context in which the militant takes off. But how would they take off? They took off actually not just because of the objective situation, because they had the right strategy, and they found themselves in the right place at the right time. And this was in the Labour Party, actually. Which had been in power, and actually immediately after World War II, they had been in power, and contrary to previous Labour governments that had betrayed the government, the Labour Party government immediately after World War II created the National Health Service, nationalized the mines, the railways. To many working class people, it seemed like, holy, Labour Party's implementing socialism. They were actually reformism that normally we say that cannot give the goods was somehow now able to give the goods in the post-war period. I'm mentioning this because this was fundamental to the orientation of the Marxists at the time, because there was massive illusions amongst the broad layers of the working class in the Labour Party and in the trade unions in particular, because they had got them the goods. The middle class was created during this period, not because the capitalists were benevolent, because the trade unions and the Labour Party had fought, and the working class as a whole had fought for it. And so there were big illusions in the Labour Party. So therefore, the perspective was based on the breakdown of the post-war boom, ferment, revolutionary events, and that this would reflect itself within the Labour Party and in the labor movement generally. And therefore, unlike the previous entry strategy that was short-term, that you enter when there is a revolutionary crisis inside a party, and they were going to enter in advance to get in early and prepare yourself. This is, I believe, a good example of what we always say Marxism is the victory of foresight over astonishment. This was a high degree of foresight. And the Marxism is worth nothing if it doesn't help you predict the direction of events. So Ted Grant, as a great Marxist, who was not basing himself on dogma, but was trying to use the analysis to plot out a way forward to put the party to be the best path of growth, not just in the current moment, but in the future. In 1965, Militant, as I said, was the smallest group. There was a lot of different Marxist groups. There was a lot of small Marxist groups. All of them were bigger than the Militant. They had the byline of Marxist voice of labor and youth that kind of captured their orientation, was to the organizations of the working class, but in particular to the young people, because young people are always more sensitive to the mood in society. We always say it's like a barometer, because they're not weighed down by the past. Their consciousness is not weighed down by the past. Older people is. You ever talk to your parents? They've been around for a couple more decades, and they have conservative ideas. Maybe they were demoralized by a struggle that they lost, something like that. Young people don't have that, and they have their whole lives ahead of them. And they're looking at, I think a lot of young people look today, it's like, I can't put up with this shit. I'm not going to live like this. I can't get a job, I can't buy a house, I can't do anything, the planet's burning, there's wars. We're going to fight against it. Older people are like, I'm not going to be around that much longer. But this is the case in every epoch, actually, that the younger people are always more connected to that revolutionary mood. As Lenin said, he who has the youth has the future. So the revolutionary movement is always firmly based in the young workers and students. Actually, the Bolsheviks were derisively known as a party of kids. The Mensheviks called them that, because the Mensheviks were a party of academics, intellectuals, older people. The Bolsheviks were the younger people. But that wasn't a bad thing. That was a very good thing. So yeah, they turned towards the Labour Party. They were active in the Labour Party, and in particular, they were active in the youth wing of the Labour Party Young Socialists. That was the name of it. They gained a majority in the Labour Party Young Socialists in 1966. Soon, they had all the positions, all the main positions in the youth wing. By 1966, we were up to 100 members, which is still very small, obviously. They turned the Labour Party Young Socialists outwards. And actually, the brilliance of this is there's a big difference when you go to working class people and you say, hey, I'm here as the XYZ Marxist group. Who the fuck are you? Me and my 4 friends, we were going to overthrow capitalism. Okay, well, very nice. I'll buy your paper, see you later, you know. But when you go we're the youth wing of the Labour Party. We stand for a socialist transformation of society. We stand for nationalization of the commanding heights. And we think the Labour Party needs to adopt. People go, oh, that's something that I can get behind. Because I can see it actually working because it's connected to something bigger, right? And that's really what they did. They used the LPYS because you would attract lots of people, not just people that wanted to join the militant. Any good left-wing youth would want to join that. So yeah, it was said that for every 3 people that joined the LPYS, 1 joined the militant. And that was the method they used to grow. It had previously been dead. It actually had previously been shut down by the leadership of the Labour Party, but under our leadership, they had reopened it. Some lefties took over the leadership of the Labour Party, and they reopened the youth wing. That's when we got in, and it took off under our leadership. The LPYS congresses grew to have over 1,000 people in them. In the late 70s, they had 2,000. It was a big, vibrant organization, connecting with the revolutionary mood that existed in the 70s, which I'll talk about a bit more. So yes, at this time there was a shift to the left in the trade unions. This confirmed Ted Grant's perspective that the crisis would have an impact in the trade unions and in the labor movement and eventually in the Labour Party. So the Wilson Labour government, you had Harold Wilson, who was in power from 1964 to 1970. He betrayed. He had what was known as the wages policy, which is basically more or less like a wage cap for workers. And in this period, Militant grew steadily because they were in the Labour Party criticizing this. And a lot of people were like, couldn't understand, they were upset. In 1971, Militant, the paper, which began as a monthly, went to every 2 weeks. 1972, it became a weekly, which is amazing, which is incredible. I don't know how they did that, because we have a monthly and it's very hard to put out. Yeah, they had in 1972 they had gone up to 350 members. So as you see, in a very short period of time, they've grown. They're still small, mostly young people. You had in 1970, you had the Heath government come into power, which is a conservative government. They were much worse than the Labour Party, of course. They tried to push through anti-trade union legislation. There was huge pressure from below. There was radicalization. Of course, most working class people saw this as a direct attack. They were very opposed to this. There was radicalization in the trade unions, and that reflected itself. All the trade union delegates that would get elected by the trade union to go to Labour Congress all started to be more and more left-wing. They were demanding a fight, right? As I said, the left had won a majority, at this point had won a majority on the National Executive Committee. Tony Benn became the main leader of the left. He was criticizing, you can look at videos of him, he was criticizing capitalism. Under our pressure, actually, the party adopted a program that the Labour Party stood for nationalizing the top 25 companies in Britain. You know, the joke was, because we stood for nationalized 200, So the joke was that's 1/8 of a socialist program. But anyway, I'm just pointing, this confirmed the perspective of Ted, that the radicalization was going to have an effect in the labor movement and in the Labour Party. And if we got in advance, we would be able to capitalize on that. We'd be in the right place at the right time. And that is what happened. There ended up being a huge revolt against the Heath government, which was it ended up being the biggest working class struggle in Britain since 1926. It was absolutely huge. There was a threat of a general strike, and actually the government gets brought down in 1974 by the miners' strike. So you can imagine what's happening. The working class is flexing its muscles, and it just brought down a hated conservative government. Labour comes back to power. But right at the beginning, they turned from promising reforms to counter-reforms, because the 1970s, as I said, it's a big epoch of crisis. The post-war boom is over. Things are all rolling in reverse. And this is actually connected to the strategy. People learn from events, as was said in the last session. Normal working class people, they don't usually read Marxist theory. They learn from events, and this event was proving to them something. But they would join the Labour Party, of course. They would join the trade union branch, and then they would get told, they would be like, but wait a minute, the Labour Party's attacking me? What the hell is this? Actually, the Labour Party right now is in government, and they're attacking benefits. They're cutting benefits for disabled people. Not surprising, because they accept capitalism. You have to accept what capitalism can give. This is what was happening now. This is what's happening now. This was happening then. So, this enabled us to connect with those people that had learned from experience and become, holy shit, I just realized I can't trust these bastards. And we said, don't worry. We're here. We're the militant. We got some ideas, Let's do this. So yes. So this was, again, Wilson, his leader. He was still the leader. He came to power again. Their opposition to this was huge. And we were surfing on that wave. By 1974, the militant had 500 members, recruiting lots of people. And it's people that are disillusioned with the labor leaders, and they're looking for a way to go, and they're not going to join the rinky-dink outfit on the sidelines. So they would join the militant. By 1976, 1,000 members. At this point, there's revolutionary events occurring all over Europe. You had a revolution in Spain. You had against Franco, his regime. You had revolution in Greece against the military junta, revolution in Portugal. You have, the Italian hot autumn. You have tons of crazy, you have May 68 in France. You had a lot at this period, just tons and tons of revolutionary events. You had a revolution in Pakistan in the late 60s. So there's this idea, there's this revolutionary ferment, But not only, so thousands of people in the Labour Party and the Labour movement are noticing, and they're joining them, they're getting in touch with the militant, they're joining. The militant's growing. But it wasn't only people like this that were noticing the militant. There was also enemies, as what it always happens, inevitably. You start growing, you're a revolutionary group, you're going to get attacked at a certain point, and you can't be afraid of it. Actually, the attacks are good. That's one thing that comes out of this. The attacks, we welcome. If they are attacking us, it means we're doing something right. They didn't need to attack the groups on the sidelines because they weren't a threat. But when there were Marxists in the Labour Party at that time, that was a huge threat. They were worried they'd lose control. So they ended up engineering the main enemy here, actually. So the press, the capitalist press, was freaking out. There's Marxists in the Labour Party. There's Trotskyists everywhere. It's crazy. But what started happening is the labor bureaucracy, in the trade unions and the Labour Party, which is always more connected with the establishment of the bourgeois state than they are the working class. They become very divorced, and they always bend to that pressure. We see that today. They were very concerned, and they actually started, and they were bending to the pressure of the media hysteria around the militant. And one of the top bureaucrats, his name, good old British society, Lord Underhill, he drew up a report, called the Underhill Report, which detailed this crazy infiltration by this conspiratorial group, oh my God, that the Trotskyists control the Young Socialists. This is unacceptable. Look, we had democratic support. Everybody supported what we were doing. We didn't sneakily take anything over. It wasn't some shadowy operation like that, Yeah, the right wing are panicking. This report, presents this infiltration. The Times, which is the main paper in the UK, they run an editorial that says "Time for a purge." They were directly demanding anti-democratic measures to expel us from the ranks of the Labour Party. They needed to drive this out of the Labour Party because the bourgeoisie understood how dangerous it was. And it wasn't just attack on the Marxists. The left was big in the Labour Party, around Tony Benn. Actually, Jeremy Corbyn comes from the Bennite tradition. The left, the general left, is that we were surfing on the wave of the general left. This is related to something. We, as Marxists, that quite often there's this idea that we need to build the left. We think, no. The crisis of capitalism builds the left. Objectively, it always does. We build the forces of revolutionary Marxism connected to that left-wing movement, right? And we basically are in that, riding that wave. And that's what the Militant was doing. So the bourgeoisie knew how dangerous this was, and they knew that they had to attack the Marxists to attack the general left. If they settled with the Marxists, then they could settle with the rest of the left, because the Marxists gave ideological backbone to the rest of the left. The left refused to publish the report. They were like, no, we're not going to publish that. That's right-wing crap. They refused to publish it, which was good. As I said, one of the lessons from this was that the attacks are not bad. The bourgeois media gets a hold of the report and publishes in the media and starts making a shitstorm about it. By 1979, because of all the publicity up and down the country, Militants are now 1,600 members. So they've been growing pretty steadily all throughout the 70s. This is still relatively small, but you can see they're getting to a certain point, right? 1979, big qualitative shift, election of Margaret Thatcher. Right-wing, conservative prime minister. This results in mass militancy in the trade union movement, industrial front, because what she represents is even more brutal attacks than ever before. Capitalism needs to settle scores with the trade unions. And it's particularly in the Tories, the Conservative Party, they remember 1974, and they want to get that one back. And that's basically, they start to prepare to settle score with the miners, which we'll get to. The right wing is very upset at the Labour Party, allowing these Trotskyists, these lefties, to be in the party. So they split in 1981 and they create the Social Democratic Party. That actually doesn't work. It doesn't work. It just leads to the further left-wing shift because all the right-wingers split away. It's great. We supported that split. Great, good, go away. Piss off. There's a ferocious campaign against the Militant, and the left eventually acquiesces. And this is one thing about left reformists, because there are reformists, even some honest left reformists. If they're still reformists, they will, at the end of the day, they might hold out a little longer than the more right-wing reformists, but at the end of the day, they will bend. Because in order to have a real backbone, you need to be opposed to the system, opposed to the bourgeoisie, and opposed to all of their institutions. And you don't bend to their witch hunts. But they bend, and they expel 5 members, or I don't know, it seemed like they picked people randomly, but Ted Grant's one of them, so expel 5 members of the editorial board from the Labour Party. Now, I've heard some people point to this. Oh, see, that was a big, shows that your tactic was a mistake. I'm like, no, that was not. This is great, actually. This is amazing. They're enacting. They're exposing themselves. They're willing to resort to a purge against us. All media, all press is good press. So the comrades in Britain at the time used it. In 1983, there's a general election. And actually, the Militant gets 2 members elected on the Labour Party ticket as Marxist MPs. And you can tell the bourgeoisie are freaking out. Now you have freaking Marxists in the parliament. And Thatcher wins the election. They thought that if they repressed the left, that would allow them to win. But repressing the left doesn't actually usually work. It means that you actually don't have anything to offer working class people. So Thatcher won, but we had 1 MPs. So from our standpoint, it was a huge victory. They had expelled 5 people, but that was all. It didn't stop us. In fact, we use it. In Liverpool, Militant developed a powerful base. had been previously under the control of the Conservatives. But under our leadership, Labour wins every seat in Liverpool. And at our height, we have over 1,000 members just in that city, which is a key proletarian city in the UK. By 1984, we've expanded rapidly up to 6,000 members. You can see the growing hand over fist. This coincides with the miners' strike. As I mentioned, Thatcher wants to settle scores with the miners. They actually prepare in advance and they stockpile coal to last them over a year so that they can starve them out. This is a huge class battle. It lasts over a year and the miners are defeated. We send in 200 full-time. We had 200 full-timers. You send a whole bunch of them into the movement with hundreds and hundreds of young comrades to the pickets to support the miners with the militant, to sell them, to show them that there is a left-wing current in the Labour Party. Ended up recruiting, after 1 year, recruited 500 miners, joined the militant. Shows what's possible, right? Unfortunately, as I mentioned, the strike is defeated, and this is actually a very important moment. And I think this is one thing, it was a little underappreciated at the effect that this would have at the time. This was a fundamental defeat for the British working class. And it led to demoralization, and it led into the rise of what Blairism in the 90s. The precursor to Blairism is Kinnock, right-wing bastard, leading the Labour Party. But yeah, this had a big negative effect on the movement. This started a long downward shift after about 15 years or so of radicalization. People were getting tired. The miners had just been defeated. If the miners had been defeated, who's going to be able to stand up to this government, right? And there's a shift to the right. Neil Kinnock, I mentioned, is elected Labour leader. In the Congress that year, he wages a big attack on the militant in Liverpool. In 1986, they start to expel members in Liverpool. 1987, there's another election. This time, we win 3 members of parliament. Again, terrifying. This is when the militant's really a household name. It's in the papers, on the TV, almost every single day. Crazy. We use this. Comrades Militant holds rallies publicly to capitalize on it. You say, what does militant really stand for? They'd put posters all over city. Come to the rally. 1,000 people would show up to learn what militant really stood for, and a whole bunch of them would join. Because they could tell, hey, look, when the right-wing capitalist media is shitting on militant nonstop, maybe they're not that bad. By 1988, we have 8,000 members. This is the height. This is the absolute height of the militant. Now, the labor bureaucracy had succeeded in expelling 220 people. They actually started shutting down entire branches of the Labour Party. They would shut down a branch and they'd create a new branch. We would take it over. Then they would shut that branch down, create a new one, and we'd come in. Because the fact of the matter is, especially in Liverpool, but in a lot of areas, the rank and file was entirely with us. So they couldn't really purge us out. You know what I mean? We took them to the court because this was all against the constitution of the Labour Party. They actually had to change the constitution of the Labour Party to be more anti-democratic. But we use this all to build. So yeah, again, attacks are not a bad thing. Now this leads to another thing, the poll tax. The poll tax Thatcher launches, I mentioned at the very beginning, was a regressive, basically a tax on everybody regardless of income. So if you think about it, it's a reactionary tax because the poor have no problem paying it, or the rich have no problem paying it, and the poor can't pay it. Ted Grant raises the perspective that we're going to struggle against this, and if just 1 million, and try to get 1 million people to not pay. At the end, 14 million people refused to pay the poll tax. As I mentioned, there's a demonstration of 250,000 in London, and eventually Margaret Thatcher is brought down. This is amazing, right? So now we get on to the question. I've been speaking for about 35 minutes. I'll try to get into for a bit here of what the hell happened then, because militant is no more. So this all looks very impressive, but as we need to analyze things with a critical eye, and we should not lose our heads with successes. Actually, most of the time, successes are more dangerous than failures. A failure forces you to learn something, although some people seem immune to learning even when they have a failure. But no, like it forces you to have to reevaluate things, right? A success doesn't necessarily, unless you do it consciously throughout. So the fact of the matter is there were problems internally. Yes, we had 8,000 members, but compared to the size of the working class in Britain, which is tens of millions, this was tiny. We raised lots of money. There was a point, it was like over £1 million per year. At the time, that's a lot of money. They had over 500 branches of the party. But there was a problem. Like I mentioned, it was almost a continual battle for like almost 15 years. A lot of the main cadres are getting exhausted and dropping out, and then replaced with new people that had a lower political level, that had less experience. There's a certain logic to it. People were trying their best, and they were running around like chickens with their head cut off. They were going from one thing to the next. It was just a constant battle, a constant fight, right? And the political level started to drop. The average political level started to get quite low in the general membership, but also amongst the full-time organizers and even amongst some of the leaders. And it was all about activity. How are you going to recruit people? And it's actually a very empiricist method. Well, what works? Well, I recruited a couple of people the other day on the street, so we just got to do more of that. They'll go to the poll tax meeting. Yep, recruit some people. They recruited them. Good. Done. Deal, right? Now we're going to get to 15,000. And this is where I can get to a guy named Peter Taaffe, who had joined in the mid-late 60s, and had played a key role. And he was a very, very good organizer. He worked hand in hand with Ted to build the party. But this is one of the things about building a party, is that we all have a role and we all have different strengths. But what needs to lead the party? The most far-sighted theory, and therefore the people that best exemplify that hold those ideas and are able to apply them. Not the organizers, actually. Because all of this turns to dust without the ideas. And the whole thing started from nothing, and based on the ideas was able to build. Peter Taaffe was very insistent on targets. Targets. We need targets. We're at 8,000, so we're going to get to 10,000 by recruiting more people, right? This is a very undialectical view. There are many periods in growth in the party. We've had that in our party, where you grow forward, and the solution is not to recruit more people, although we do want to, but to educate the ones that have joined. That you recruit quantity, you turn into quality, and then that quality allows you to get more quantity. Why would people join if they come to a meeting and nobody has any answers to their questions? And this was why we focus on building Marxist cadres. And this is what started to fail in the Militant. It ended up being a bit like a mile wide, inch deep, and the apparatus of the party, the full-time, would exert pressure to get results. And the level was going down. There was always activity. There was something to do. Taaffe closed down the education department because he thought, that's like a waste of resources, right? Because you got to do more stuff in the movement. And it ended up being kind of like a treadmill. You're going around in circles, destroying, burning out many people, et cetera, et cetera. So, and there was a certain psychology to this. I think this exists in any organization. Like I said, you have new people come in, and the organization growing very quickly, they're thrust into a leading position. You have to lead. You're a branch chair. You're on the regional committee. You're on the district committee. You're on the central committee. Wow. Amazing, right? Doesn't really make you, just because you get elected onto something like that, doesn't make you amazing. Doesn't put more ideas in your head, doesn't give you more experience necessarily. And there was, you're a full-timer now. You got hired. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Doesn't mean you're all of a sudden better. So, and this was a thing that happened in the Militant. And there's this, and so when people are thrust in, we always got to be careful with this. When people are put in a leading position, people come to you for answers. And if you don't have the answers, what happens? There can be a certain psychology where you're like, okay, but stop being uncomfortable for me. Can you just do some shit? Get some shit done? That's not going to help build the party. Get out of here. Where a good leadership goes, great question. Let's talk. Convince people. Raise the level. Which is more important, ultimately, than doing the the task on the ground, right? Although both have to be connected. So yeah, there was a certain psychology that had built up of commandism, ordering people around, not politically convincing, not politically leading. The original core of cadres built up in the 60s and 70s had really built in the most difficult times in the 60s, especially them, built in the most difficult times and had earned the right to lead. They had immense authority because the only way they could possibly build from nothing was to get the ideas and to learn the method, right? But if you join the organization in the late 70s or 80s, woo, fucking party, it's great, it's amazing, it's huge, it's so cool, right? A lot of people joined not because they agreed. They joined because it was the biggest game in town. And that's always dangerous. That's why we get people that join us because they like us, because we got numbers, right? But that's not why we're strong. That is not why we're strong. And all of this could be nothing very quickly if it's not based on the rock-solid basis of Marxism. So that was exactly the problem that they had in the Militant at the time. Yes. So instead of educating people and building cadres, they were being plowed into activity. Oh, what do you do? Come build the poll tax campaign, Go to the miners' strike. Fight the witch hunt. This was the problem. Organizational tasks were taking priority over politics. And the number of people that could actually explain the ideas and give the good explanations was smaller and smaller relative to the size of the organization. This is very bad when that happens. Yes. And there were real problems. Like I said, there was basically after the miners' struggle, especially, started to become a bit more of a period of reaction. That really picks up in the 90s with the collapse of the Soviet Union. But the shift in the Labour Party was definitely to the right. There was a constant witch hunt. And honestly, at this point, we're not really gaining much from the Labour Party. Nothing much directly. We're doing more and more open work, although still doing some work in the Labour Party. The bureaucracy closes down the LPYS, the Young Socialists, so we can't do that anymore. And there developed a big frustration in the leadership, actually, at the situation. Impatience. This is a lesson for everyone. Nothing good comes from frustration and impatience. Now, it's not easy to get rid of that feeling if you have that feeling, but you have to admit that you have it when you have it. And you have to try to figure out why you have it. Because if you don't, and you're just running around with this impatient frustration, it leads to a lot of mistakes, a lot of rushed decisions, a lot of shortcuts, trying to find a shortcut, trying to find an easy, simple solution. And this is what was happening in the leadership among a wide layer of the full-timers who were pissed off at the labor bureaucracy, who were pissed off at Neil Kinnock, and were looking for a way out. Now, ultimately, a healthy Marxist leadership would have recognized the situation. Ted Grant, multiple times, brought up to the regional committees and comrades that the level was too low, that we needed to, do something about it. But this was largely ignored. So yes, the left wing that the Militant rose on was receding, and the coming period, the fact of the matter is the coming period was going to be difficult for the organization in Britain anyway. It was always going to be difficult. The 90s, I'm old enough to remember the 90s. The 90s were an absolute shit time, politically. It was just shit everywhere. The only interesting things were maybe the Zapatistas in Mexico, and at the end of the 90s, you had Hugo Chavez elected in Venezuela. Other than that, there was very little good, very little revolution or left-wing movement. Everything was to the right. So it was going to be a difficult period for the Militant anyway. But what was to be done? What was needed was to recognize the change in the objective conditions, that the masses had been fighting for like 15 years and things were going in the other direction. And what we needed was to focus more internally on consolidation and building cadres. But this layer of the leadership couldn't admit that, couldn't say that. That's not cool. That's not fun. And also, many of them were not going to be particularly good at that. They were good at the activity. They weren't good at the education and the theory. So instead, they came up with this thing which eventually was known as the Open Turn. So in 1990, a long-standing left-wing MP, Eric Heffer, dies in Liverpool, where we're very strong. And yeah, we're the dominant force in Liverpool in the Labour Party. And a comrade of ours, Leslie Mahmoud, was blocked from standing for the election by the Labour Party bureaucracy, and they put this guy, a real bastard, Peter Kilfoyle. He was the main hatchet man behind the purge. He had been literally personally expelling our comrades. And they put him almost as a provocation. This is connected to something I said earlier. We cannot lose our heads. And I think some of the comrades lost their heads. And they were like, we can't accept that. We have to fight. We have to fight. And so they ran a candidate against Peter Kilfoyle, outside of the Labour Party, against the Labour Party, called Real Labour. And in the articles, they talk about, we're going to have a victory, we're going to beat him. And then that perspective starts to change when they see that that's probably not going to happen. They say, oh, we're neck and neck. And then it changes to, we're going to get a substantial vote. Then it changes to, we're going to get 10,000 votes. Then it changes, we're going to get 5,000 votes. Lastly, when the election is called, they get 2,613 votes, while Kilfoyle had 21,317. So basically, this is an error. This is a massive error. The fact of the matter is, it's a misjudging of the masses, actually, of the working class. The fact of the matter is, by running against Labour, the mass of the working class, only the most left-wing people understood that. But the mass of the working class did not understand that. They were not going to split the vote and maybe get the Conservatives in. They were going to vote for the Labour Party, holding their noses for Peter Kilfoyle. Probably a lot of them didn't like him, but they were going to vote for him anyway. Now, this is an error. It should have been admitted and corrected. But a section of the leadership around Peter Taaffe had lost their heads. They had big heads, and they couldn't admit a mistake. They were frustrated and looking for a shortcut. They ran the paper the next week that said 2,613 votes for socialism. And they just talked about how amazing this was. This was completely mistaken. Ted Grant opposes this. He says this is going to be, look, this is really wrong. We need to admit the mistake, and we can repair. We can actually fix it. We can educate everybody, right? But it wasn't. Ted correctly says this is going to be repeated in the rest of the country, and this is going to be repeated internationally. And they say, oh, no, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. You're making stuff up. He was entirely proven correct. It was an ultra-left turn that was proven correct by Ted. 1991, the idea is raised to launch our own party in Scotland against the Labour Party, known as the Scottish Socialist Party, actually still exists to this day. It was raised in order to fight nationalism, apparently. It ended up capitulating and becoming a nationalist party and is split from their organization. They lost control of it. So I think that proved Ted right on that basis. Most of the full-timers united against Ted. And there was a lot of personal animosity and slander and gossip. They couldn't tackle him outright because they knew that politically he was always going to win. There was, and as Jacob mentioned, a lot of the main, we come from this. So a lot of the main leaders of our international, Rob Sewell, Alan Woods, Fred Weston, came from this. Ted, obviously, were expelled, actually. That's what happens. What is the result of this open turn? Well, the members of parliament that we have, we lose them. Because you made your own new party, and you're running against the Labour Party, so you lost it all. Lost all the city councillors, lost everything. This massive conquest of the party is scuttled away due to a frustrated ultra-left binge, which could have been justified in certain circumstances, but definitely not in the 1990s, which was a general period of reaction. Yes, this was debated at a Congress, eventually. The majority around Peter Taaffe won 93% of the vote. I've had some people, we call them Taaffites, raise that with me. Yeah, but it was the majority. And I'm like, so? Does it make it right? Does it make it right? You guys? No? That's not how you'd figure out what is the correct idea, based on whether or not the majority supports it. Marx famously said, he says, I've been a minority, and I'm proud to be in a minority most of my life. I've been in a minority almost my entire life in society. So That does not determine what is right or wrong. But yeah, Peter Taaffe was obsessed with being in the majority, the majority, the majority. It's sort of a bit of a Stalinist mentality, right? Yes, but yeah, they mobilized the weight of the apparatus in the political debate. And basically, yeah, crushed the opposition. Ted says to Alan, oh, no, we'll struggle for even if it takes us a couple years, we're right, so we'll just do the political struggle and we'll win the majority again. And Alan says, Ted, we're not going to have 2 years. They're going to expel us. And they'd expelled them a couple months later. So yeah, why did this happen? As I mentioned, the political level had been lowered. It was kind of like many new comrades that weren't trained and educated didn't understand the debate that was happening. We're mad, we're pissed off, we're young and angry at the Labour Party and just supported Peter Taaffe, right? It was kind of like, if you know a bit of how Stalin rose to power, it's kind of like the Lenin levy. Stalin at one point opened up the party to a whole bunch of new people, right? Which is not always bad, but in certain circumstances is not a good idea because it watered down the party and lowered the political level. He also handpicked who he was going to let in. So yeah, this is what contributed to this. Ted calls this open turn, a shortcut off a cliff, which, how do you know if an idea is right? It's what happens, right? And this organization from 8,000. I've listened to some leadoffs, some presentations by Peter Taaffe and some other people from their international that talk about almost the same things I talked about. Great, Liverpool City Council, 3 MPs, 8,000 members, poll tax campaign, da da da. And then they stop. And I'm like, and then what happened? And then what happened, right? Learn the lesson. So yeah, it was a shortcut off the cliff. They completely destroyed themselves. And we're a much larger organization than they are in Britain now, although that's taken a little bit of time. So yes, our comrades were expelled in January 1992. There was a split in the international. In Britain, we had about 230 members left. So a small group. It was a mess, and we had to rebuild. But this is not, now this is regretful. Obviously, this is bad, that a lot of these gains were lost. But this is not unknown to the Marxist movement. It's not the first time that a split had happened. Even from the first international, the Marx-Bakunin conflict, the Menshevik-Bolshevik split that we talked about a little bit. The important thing, splits are almost inevitable at some points. This, I don't think, was inevitable. I don't think it was inevitable. I think with a proper approach, identifying certain things earlier along, it could have been averted. Not that the party would have gained and recruited massively, continued to recruit massively throughout the 90s, but could have kept thousands and thousands of people throughout the 90s, trained them for the next future struggle, which the stuff starts to pick up again in the late 90s, early 2000s. That should have been the perspective. And out of this, we owe our international to this, because out of this, Ted Grant, Alan Woods, Rob Sewell, and others who stood firm in a minority on a basis of principle to keep the ideas alive, just like Marx did in his day, just like Lenin did in his day, just like Trotsky did in his day. And they defended the basic ideas all through the 90s. The 90s were a difficult period. Like I said, they weren't going to build much. But they wrote books. They wrote Bolshevism, which we have here, a very good book. Russia from Revolution to Counter-Revolution, Reason and Revolt, through the 90s, to basically focus on, like I said, the ideas, the theory, the cadres. The Taaffites jeered, the ones that were in the majority. They called Ted and Alan mere theoreticians, which I do think that this explains everything about their view. They derided theory. They had a disdain for it, and they were like, but how does that liberate the workers? We need action, right? Action, action, action. Without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. That is Lenin's what is to be done. This is very clear. There are a lot of people that want action today. The question is, on what basis and how are we going to win? So yeah, lessons. I think the main lessons, the power of ideas, how do we build the party? The theoreticians, the people with the highest level must lead. If leaders in this organization cannot give you good answers, that's not good. that is not good. We don't expect superhumans. Not every person on the Central Committee is going to give you the best explanation on every question. But if people push back with arrogance and ordering you around, this is also unacceptable, and this is not how we're going to build the organization. Yeah, Taaffe was a very good organizer. Know who else was a good organizer? Stalin was a very good organizer. Lenin relied on him, actually, because he was good at getting shit done. But that type of person can't lead the party. Can be a very useful comrade. I know a lot of comrades that can get a lot of shit done. Focus on education, comrades. Focus on the ideas. Focus on these books. Learn. That is so important. Yes, so the reason for the success of the Militant was a scrupulous attitude to ideas and theory, the correct orientation, did not succumb to ultra-leftism, sank deep roots in the labor movement, and I believe that is our task today. Our success in the future will be predicated on this. Now, someone might ask me, I'm predicting a question, how do we stop that from happening? Well, there are no guarantees. There isn't a guarantee. If you want a guarantee, go buy something from the store. Even the most healthy organization can degenerate, and sometimes it's inevitable. Like the degeneration of the Bolshevik Party, with no successful workers' revolution in Europe, was inevitable at one point or another. This was not inevitable, because they did not have that same pressure. It was an error of leadership, right? Sometimes people say, oh, we need better rules in the Constitution to stop this sort of thing. That's not going to stop it. You could have the perfect constitutional rules, and it won't stop people abusing it, and it won't stop this type of stuff. The only thing that can ensure a healthy political development of an organization and a healthy leadership and a healthy political regime in a party is cadre building, is developing cadres, developing a really deep knowledge of Marxist theory and an experience, which cannot be done quickly and easily. And I think I appeal to everyone to really focus on that aspect. If you don't read every day, you should. You got to read Marxist theory. You got to understand your stuff, because that's when people join us, they want to know answers to things. And especially today, the movement's been thrown so far back. Most people have no idea what Marxism is. I had a discussion with somebody the other day, and they said, oh, I'm reading Capital Volume 2. And I've already read Capital Volume 1. I was, great. Can you tell me what a commodity is? And they looked at me like, and they couldn't. I was like, okay, you got to start from some pretty basic stuff, right, to explain this. It's very important. So yes, we want to build a party with a high level. Like our party, we've grown very quickly over the last year and a half. We've slowed down and we started to stagnate a bit. I'm not worried about that at all. I'm not worried about that, because we're going to catapult forward in the coming period. I think this year we're going to explode forward. But on what basis? There are so many people that reach out to us every single day. I get the emails. I get a little folder. They're just popping in cities across the country. Hundreds, sometimes hundreds every month, writing into us, wanting to join. How come they're not members? Well, they're looking for answers. And each one of us needs to be one of those people that can provide those answers. So we need constant education, and we can't sacrifice education for activity. We need to unite theory and practice to ensure that we do not succumb to pressures in the movement, super activity, movementism, whatever, like what happened in the organization at the time. So that's the lessons of the Militant. I spoke for about an hour. Sorry for speaking so long, but it's a big topic.